Nobody knows why the Targaryens first came to the island of Dragonstone. Old Valyria was then at the height of its power and the center of the civilized world, which ended at the Narrow Sea. Westeros was a filthy backwater with 7 kings squabbling over borders and minor glories. So much for progress. The island itself was and is nothing. It had no gold or gems to lure Valyrian nobility. All it has is rock, mostly a shiny black stone too brittle for war and too sharp for building. The Targaryens called it dragonglass. I call it useless. But the Targaryens managed to raise a castle here. Simpletons claim they used ancient Valyrian sorcery, forgetting that the Targaryens brought a small army with them from Essos. There's no magic in strong backs, though admittedly the castle is unlike any in Westeros. Foreign and strange. If the Targaryens ever regretted their barren outpost and longed for the comforts of home, the doom made their folly permanent. Valyria collapsed into the waves and was no more. To look east was to see the ruin of their homeland, the greatest civilization before or since. But to look west, as Aegon realized, was to see a fertile land ripe for conquest. Perhaps even a new Valyria. Though good for little else, Dragonstone was the perfect staging point for Aegon's invasion of Westeros. The Blackwater Bay granted easy access to the continent. The lands there were disputed by 3 kingdoms, the Reach, the Iron Islands, and the Stormlands. But their capitals were far enough away that none could mount a force before Aegon got a foothold, even if their kings had been able to stop bickering over whose problem he was. Then it was too late. Aegon had chosen his first camp well, with the bay to the east, the river to the south, and open fields to the north and west. His army would be impossible to take by surprise. A perfect site for an invasion, and one day, his capital city, King's Landing.
On the shores of the God's Eye, due north of the Isle of Faces, rises a monument to arrogance and cruelty. Harrenhal. For a people who prided themselves on their ships, the Iron Men of old seized any chance to leave them, and carved out a vast kingdom from the peaceful river lords. The empire reached its zenith under King Harrenhal, called the Black by those he terrorized, and by his own men, though they meant it proudly. King Harren enslaved the Riverlands to raise the mightiest fortress Westeros had ever seen. A castle that could garrison 1 million men, with walls so vast that winters would come and go, and besieging armies grow old and grey before the castle fell. 5 towers he ordered, reaching into the heavens like grasping fingers. A monstrosity which he forced our people to build for their own subjugation. But the very day the slaves laid the last stone, Aegon Targaryen and his sisters arrived in the south. When they arrived with their small army, Harren laughed and shut the gates. Harrenhal would have its first test, and an easy one at that. It failed. Harrenhal could have withstood an assault from all the armies in Westeros combined. But Harren learned that the tallest and thickest walls meant little to dragons, for dragons fly.
The problem with huge castles is they blind you to what's outside, both by their size and the arrogance they inspire. Not that the Ironborn ever lacked for that. They take pride in their ignorance of every trapping of civilization, though any baker could have told them that fire turns stone walls into an oven. And so Harren the Black finally lived up to his name, and the River Lord swept the Ironborn back to the sea.
When Aegon Targaryen declared that Westeros was now his, King Mern IX allied with King Loren Lannister of the Westerlands. Together, they fought to save Westeros from another foreign barbarian, whose family practices put decent men to shame. But the dragons won, and the Field of Fire claimed Mern and all his sons, grandsons, and brothers. Instead of using the castle for what it was built to do, Harlan Tyrell surrendered it to Aegon without a fight. In exchange, Harlan was given the castle his family had served for thousands of years, with all its attendant lands and lords.
For over 1,000 years, the Green Hand's sons and grandsons ruled the Reach as House Gardener. The offshoots of his daughters grew into vast and powerful houses in their own right, except for House Tyrell. We chose instead to serve our Gardener cousins faithfully as stewards, to manage their stronghold of Highgarden and the daily affairs of the Reach. Our words are growing strong. And under our stewardship, the Reach did just that. As did we. Until a blundering king almost cost us everything. Aegon Targaryen had landed in Westeros. King Mern allied us with the Rock to repel the upstart's army. One can only marvel that King Mern did not reconsider when he saw the living dragons against him. Perhaps he should have sought counsel from his trusted stewards before he set out. Then again, perhaps he did. At the Field of Fire, Aegon, and let us not forget, his sisters, burnt the combined armies of the Reach and Rock. King Mern paid for his misjudgment with his life and that of his ancient family. In a day, the Reach had lost its king, its ruling house, and most of its army. Thankfully for everyone, my ancestor, Harlan Tyrell, had better sense. Until the Maesters sorted out the entail among Mern's cousins, Harlan the Steward was acting Lord of Highgarden. To ensure peace and life in the Reach, he would yield the castle to Aegon. The other castles and families would then follow, as they had since the Dawn Age. Aegon had a continent to conquer, and the fertile Reach was too valuable to raise. He accepted Harlan's proposal and welcomed our lands into his kingdom. To show his gratitude, Aegon entitled Harlan to Highgarden, the castle his family had served for 1,000 years, and made House Tyrell his wardens of the south, choosing us over older, greater families in the Reach. Our house thus owed everything to the Targaryens.
The Lannisters reigned as kings of the Rock for thousands of years, and worked to make it the envy of the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. Our time as kings ended, however, when Aegon Targaryen, otherwise known as Aegon the Conqueror, arrived in Westeros with his army. The last king of the Rock, King Loren Lannister, joined forces with King Mern Gardener, the king of the Reach. Together, with 60,000 men, they met the Targaryen host in open battle. History tells us that Aegon unleashed all 3 of his dragons, slaughtering 4,000 men at what came to be known as the Field of Fire. King Mern himself was burned alive that day, and House Gardener turned to ash with him. Seeing both the threat and opportunity the Targaryens represented, Loren wisely surrendered and aided Aegon in his further conquest of Westeros. The Lannisters were thus appointed Lords Paramount of the Westerlands and Wardens of the West, titles we hold to this day.
While Aegon burned the kings of the Iron Islands, the Rock and the Reach, his fiercest commander and rumoured brother, Orys Baratheon, set out to subdue the Stormlands. No matter how fierce a warrior he was, no one could have envied his task. Storm's End had seen thousands of years of war and never fallen. But Argilac, the Storm King, chose not to barricade himself behind its walls, and gave Orys the battle he must have hoped for. Orys slew Argilac, and took Argilac's castle, kingdom, daughter, sigil, and house words. House Baratheon became the Lord of the Stormlands.
When Aegon and his dragons landed on Westeros, the kings of the Rock and the Reach sent all their men to die to defend their crowns. Torrhen Stark knelt, to spare his people the same fate. He placed duty above pride.
The south had already fallen to Aegon and his dragons, only the north remained. My ancestor, King Torrhen Stark, marched the north down to the Trident and beheld Aegon's army, larger than Torrhen's own by half, and with 3 dragons circling overhead. Many northern bannermen wanted to attack anyway, claiming northern valor would carry the day. Others wanted to fall back to Moat Cailin and make a stand there. But Torrhen had heard how the armies of the Rock and the Reach had burned on the field of fire, and had seen the fires still glowing beneath the rubble of Harrenhal. He knelt and laid his ancient crown at Aegon's feet, and rose a king no more but Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Some northerners still sneer at my ancestor as the king who knelt, forgetting that because of Torrhen they're alive today to sneer. Their ancestors didn't leave their burned bones at the Trident, and their twisted swords didn't fill Aegon's new throne.
No army in the Seven Kingdoms can match the pride and chivalry of the Knights of the Vale. After all, they were the first true knights in Westeros, until the dragons changed the game. When Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros, the Queen Regent of the Vale shut the bloody gate against the Targaryens and massed the Knights of the Vale behind it to lock it. But Visenya simply flew her dragon to a balcony of the Eyrie where the boy king was playing, and gave the boy a ride round the castle in return for his mother's submission.
When Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros, the High Septon locked himself in a sept for 7 days and 7 nights. Finally, the crone lifted her golden lamp and showed him the path ahead. The High Septon himself would anoint and crown Aegon as Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and the Faith Militant rallied behind Aegon in governing his newly united land. Yet Aegon and his sisters never wholly accepted the faith. The High Septon had conceded Aegon's marriages to his sisters as a relic of his Valyrian heritage, which would soon fade.
Aegon Targaryen sought to unite Westeros as Nymeria had Dorne. The other 6 kingdoms fell quickly before his dragons and ambition. When his sister wife, Rhaenys, flew her dragon south and demanded our surrender as well, Princess Meria Martell warned, "I will not fight you, nor will I kneel to you. Dorne has no king. Tell your brother that." Rhaenys threatened that the next time the Targaryens would come with fire and blood. Meria replied, "You may burn us, my lady, but you will not bend us, break us, or make us bow. This is Dorne. You are not wanted here. Return at your peril." Rhaenys did, and she died. Her dragon died. All her soldiers died. Eventually, her brother, the Conqueror, conceded that what Nymeria had done, he could not undo. Generations later, another foolish Targaryen invaded Dorne. He died as well. Eventually, we did join the Seven Kingdoms, but when we wanted, and on our terms.